Hi, I am Mustafa Bilal, a research assistant at the Center for Aerospace and Security Studies, Islamabad. Today, I will be reviewing the book titled Unit X: How the Pentagon and Silicon Valley Are Transforming the Future of Warfare. The book is co authored by Raj Shah and Christopher Kirchhoff, and it was published last year in July. The format of the review is going to be a series of questions regarding the book, which I will be answering. The first question would now be being flashed on your screen. Well, that's an interesting introductory question. To begin with, I would say that both of the authors are highly experienced American national security officials who portray themselves in the book as leading this high tech special forces group against the world's largest and most bureaucratic organization, the Pentagon. Unit X really gives you a frontline perspective of the battle between 21st century technology and 20th century bureaucracy. But the book really makes you wonder, why did the leaders of a fledgling organization like Unit X decide to take on a leviathan in the form of the Pentagon? The authors justify embarking on this uphill battle by declaring it as an existential imperative for American national security. Right at the start of the book, they warned that the technological edge of the United States military had been crumbling. The argument they put forward is that decades of suffocating red tape, combined with an over reliance on slow moving defense contractors, the primes, and a total cultural disconnect from the Silicon Valley's innovation engine, had left a big technological chink in the armor of the United States. As a result, the authors predicted that the United States might very well suffer an outright defeat against China in a potential conflict. So, how was this catastrophe to be averted? Well, the answer was Unit X, or the Defense Innovation Unit Experimental. I am sure most of you watching this video would be familiar with DARPA, but Unit X was a much smaller organization in comparison. It was envisioned by late US Defense Secretary Ash Carter to inject Silicon Valley's agile DNA straight into the clogged arteries of the Department of Defense. The authors called it Hacking the Pentagon, and this book is their raw, boots on the ground report. Moving on to the second question. Well, I would say that the strength of the book's narrative is indeed insider access, as Raj Shah and Christopher Kirchhoff take the readers into the trenches alongside them. Right in the trenches, the readers get to witness bureaucratic hurdles in the Pentagon, such as the process of zeroization, in which junior congressional staffers have the authority to erase the budget of small organizations like Unit X with just the stroke of a pen. The authors then make the readers imagine US Air Force crews in Qatar managing life or death mid-air refueling missions using pucks on a whiteboard, an obsolete system unchanged since the Second World War. Then the book proceeds with interesting tales of how tiny startups with innovative ideas like Capella Space were sabotaged by Pentagon gatekeepers with vested interest in maintaining the status quo. Raj and Shah describe how Unit X fought like hell against the system, but the system fought back harder. However, because of the ingenuity and the perseverance of the team comprising Unit X, they did manage to score several wins, like wielding creative legal loopholes such as the Other Transactions Authority to bypass the Pentagon's procurement quicksand. But as you will notice at this point in the video, that structurally, the book seems to read like a mission log with the repetitive cycle of near-death budget cuts, followed by a series of hard-fought victories. Now, this is the classic underdog story, sure, but this next mission pacing of the book sidelines deeper questions in the individual chapters, like whether defense contractors or the private defense startups can truly compete with the established primes across the board, or what happens when the commercial technology is weaponized. Now, the third question. Well, As far as the takeaways are concerned, I can think of a few things. Firstly, the Pentagon expose goes into brutal detail, which offers an illuminating account of institutional paralysis. Secondly, I would say that the cultural divide between the Pentagon and Silicon Valley makes for interesting drama, where the Pentagon brass tend to view Software Valley, the engineers in Silicon Valley as naive, and the engineers, for their part, well, they see the Pentagon as technologically backwards and morally shady. Bridging this gap was half the victory for Unitex by facilitating cultural exchanges between them. The third key takeaway that comes to mind, and something which stood out to me, is how China is repeatedly portrayed by the authors as this existential threat to the United States, which is evident by the fact that China is mentioned 225 times throughout the book, on every page or so. And the authors also always seem to club China's civil military fusion strategy with criticism of authoritarian regimes, while at the same time advocating for the same strategy to be emulated by the United States, albeit leveraging its unique advantages offered by their so called democratic system. The irony is not lost on anyone. Anyways, moving on, another key takeaway is how the Russo Ukrainian War affirmed the assessment of Unitex. We saw commercial satellites spotting Russian tanks, AI augmented targeting, and cheap drones swarming legacy systems. Now, this is exactly the kind of future conflicts predicted by the leaders of Unitex. And lastly, I would say that the book gives an insightful account of how seemingly commercial firms like Joby Aviation, which is currently making headlines for its upcoming flying cars in Dubai, was backed by the Pentagon, which allowed it to, well, take off. The fourth question is, well, I said earlier that the insider view of Raj and Chris is a strength of the book, but at the same time, I would say that it is also a blind spot. The authors make a case for radical reforms in the Pentagon, but you see, their case is fundamentally one sided, as the readers are only locked into their perspective, whereas voices from the threatened defense contractors, the primes, the ethically uneasy folks at Silicon Valley, or resistant factions in the Pentagon get flattened into caricatures, like the two small minded appropriation staffers, Evelyn and Ed, which the authors seem to reference throughout the book. Moreover, while the authors do acknowledge the protests at Silicon Valley following the revelations by Edward Snowden and the revolt following Google's Project Maven, they tend to label ethically objecting software engineers in Silicon Valley as hopelessly naive. Now, I would say that this dodges the real debate over AI killing machines and the role of big tech in war, as evident from the AI-enabled destruction in Palestine. The authors therefore seem to cast a blind eye on the multifaceted implications of weaponizing AI. Rather, to me, I would say it seemed like they actually advocated for it, following the likes of their fellow defense tech bros like the CEO of Endural, for instance. And on this note, controversial defense tech unicorns like Endural and Palantir are also frequently share the spotlight in the book. But again, the focus of the authors stays on adopting the bleeding edge of technology and not on actually exploring its dark side. And the authors also tend to repeatedly stress the argument that beating China demands disruptive innovation and public-private partnerships. But again, they obsess over how to get the latest technology into the hands of the Pentagon, which buries deeper questions like how to go about governing it in the age of algorithmic warfare. Instead, I would say that the book is heavy on tactical operational details, like maritime domain awareness by sail drones, or surveilling terrorists or North Korean missiles by satellites. The book, therefore, does not address how warfare would fundamentally transform. For instance, when drone swarms powered by AI become mainstream, as demonstrated by Ukraine's recent Operation Spiderweb. Silicon Valley also gets a free pass on other things like monopolistic practices and data privacy. Rather, these important issues are glossed over. So, overall, I would say that the authors soft pedal Silicon Valley's flaws, sometimes oversell its victories, and sidestep the ethical grenades they toss themselves. And as one critic quoted in the book said, we still need hardcore production of serious weaponry. While the authors explore this tension between new and old weapon systems, they again do so without incorporating opposing perspectives. Now, moving on to the last question. Well, honestly, despite its shortcomings and one sided picture, I would still recommend giving Unit X a read, especially for all those viewers who are interested in defense technologies, entrepreneurship, and bureaucratic reforms. While the book does not grapple with the debate over the ethics of military AI, which is the core theme of other works like The Army of None, Unit X still offers insightful technological and organizational lessons for states that are advancing civil military fusion. For example, here in Pakistan, we have an expanding defense tech ecosystem spearheaded by the Network of National Aerospace Science and Technology Parks, NASTAPs, where commercial and civil technologies are being leveraged for bolstering Pakistan's national security. In fact, not far from where I'm sitting, there are startups tirelessly brainstorming on developing their prototypes. On this note, the book forces the readers to stare into the Pentagon's valley of death, which the authors describe as the final resting place for technological prototypes that never make it to battlefield deployment because of outdated bureaucratic procedures and processes. The authors shed light on just how wide and deep the valley is, leaving readers with two concerning questions for international security. Can the United States weld steel to silicon fast enough and, at the same time, ethically enough? And will this innovation prevent global conflict or ignite it? With the world on edge, we may find out sooner than we would like. I think that would be all for today. Thank you everyone for watching. Be sure to follow CASS on all our social media platforms to stay updated with our latest publications.